Our guest on the Motivation Show is the son of one of the greatest recording artists of the 1970s, with two of the biggest and most memorable hits of all time, Taxi and 1974's monumentous hit, Cats in the Cradle. He is the co-producer of the award-winning documentary Harry Chapin, Cats in the Cradle, the song that changed our lives. Weighing in on the film are musical giants, including Billy Joel, Judy Collins, Pat Benatar, Dee Snider, Mandy Patinkin, and others. Welcome to the Motivation Show, Jason Chapin.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
So the big question that begs to be answered is your father, tragically died in a car accident in 1981. Why now a documentary in its 50th year anniversary?
We made a documentary that was released in 2020 called Harry Chapin, When in Doubt, Do Something. And it was about his life, his music, and his humanitarian work. And of course, there was a lot of focus on Cats in the Cradle because that was his #1 hit that everybody, most everybody knows and loves. And so we ended up having some discussions about whether or not there was enough there to make another film dedicated to that song. And it was coming up on the 50th anniversary, and we decided that we would pursue it, and everything came into place, so we were able to do it.
I can't think of too many other songs where the lyrics just kind of glue into my head. I must have sang that song badly in the shower, maybe at least 100 times. It's that kind of song. My child arrived just the other day. He came through the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking for I knew it. And as he grew, he'd said, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when. We'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. I can't believe I even tried to sing that in front of you.
Get your manager to line up the tour and get those dates on the calendar.
But seriously, I did sing that song probably at least 100 times, and I probably sang Taxi at least 100 times as well. So who was the child that arrived?
There were a lot of things I knew before we did the film, and then a lot of things I learned during making the film. And I knew all along growing up that my mother, very creative, is a writer. She's 91. And she wrote a lot of poetry. And she and my father first met when my mother had 3 kids, and she was looking to learn how to play guitar. And my father was in the neighborhood, and he answered. And so he gave her some guitar lessons. And For Big Fans is a song that my father wrote on the same album as Cats in the Cradle, Verities and Balderdash, called I Want to Learn a Love Song. And it was all about their relationship, which was totally platonic. It was all about music. But, between lessons, they ended up having some conversations about poetry. So my mother, fast forward, my mother gets divorced, remarries, marries Harry, and they're still sharing, poetry. And my mother wrote a poem about the relationship her first husband had with his father, and showed it to Harry, and he said, "That's nice," but wasn't moved. And then my younger brother Josh was born, and he was going through all of the poetry and revisited that poem and said, I'm going to play with this. And he ended up converting that poem into the song Cats in the Cradle. So it may be the only #1 song that I'm aware of that was written by a husband and wife.
Yeah, well, Harry did say in the film that he stole it from his wife.
Yeah.
Those are kind of strong words. Sounds like they just worked on it together, and the rest is history. What do you think is the reason why that song resonates literally with people who are not even interested in that genre of music. Like Dee Snider, Twisted Sister, even said, he's not really into like acoustic music, but he just kind of can't get those songs out of his head.
Well, I'm not a musician, but I have the feeling that a lot of people connected with the song because it had a catchy chorus. It had, some arrangements that people were moved by, and of course, the lyrics stirred their emotions. So the irony is that it was, I think, the third single released on the album, and my mother said, this should not be released as a single. This will not be a hit, because back in the 70s, the audience was basically teenage girls who were buying singles. So this just didn't have any practical, logical way for it to become a hit. But I think it just, for some reason, people heard it. And the first time they heard it, they just felt the connection to it and really loved the song. And, once the DJs like the song and start playing it a lot, then, it gets the exposure. So it just caught fire.
Well, in the documentary, Judy Collins, the great singer, said that Harry had lyrically the human touch, and he had a genius of putting scenes together that happened in real life. And then Billy Joel says it was all about humanity, not politics, but what it's like to be human. So they both use the word human. And he goes on to talk about, what it's like to be human and the foible and failures and struggles. So I guess he hit that sort of personal chord. And then your mom in the documentary, she says, we don't know life lessons until it's too late. What do you suppose she meant exactly by that?
Well, a lot of times we fumble and stumble through life, and whether we have a good or bad relationship with, different family members, parents, children, we're not always thinking about it. And we should be thinking about those relationships all the time, because those are the most important things in our lives. And so, I think my mother's lesson with her first husband was, he wasn't a good father because he didn't have a good father, or at least, the person who should have played the fatherly role. And I think that my mother was also trying to kind of nudge my father and say, look, your kids are going to grow up pretty fast. There's a lesson here for you. You need to understand that you need to play an active role as a father, and not, spend all the time touring and doing all these other projects. So, I think there were a couple different things that my mother was hoping that the song would mean to my family, but I also think she wanted to just remind anyone else who was willing to listen that, relationships are precious. And what I've also learned from the song is that most people think it's a very sad song. Some people say it's incredibly sad because, the father and son never have a good relationship. But if you listen to the last verse closely, the son, when the father wants to get together, when the son says, I'd love to, Dad, but my kid's got the flu and my job is really tough. And so he's trying to spend his time with his own family, meeting his own obligations. So I think it ends up, being a lesson, but a positive.
Yeah. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me my son was just like me. Yeah. So what was it like growing up in the 1970s in the Chapin household with these mega hits, and your father now the talk of the town, and being invited on Johnny Carson and all these great shows?
It was, it was just totally fascinating to me, because when we were living out on Long Island on the South Shore in Point Lookout, before my father was pursuing his music career, we didn't really, have anything exciting going on. He wasn't doing concerts, he wasn't playing on the radio, he wasn't getting a lot of attention because he didn't really have any success. And at the time, he was really preoccupied on being a filmmaker. So again, there's an interesting observation there. I think his filmmaking made him a better songwriter and a better performer, because he was always looking at things through his own lens and trying to understand what other people. But anyway, fast forward, Taxi becomes a surprise hit, and he's got a record deal, and he's doing concerts all over the country, and he's building an audience, a fan base. And so, then he had WOLD, a second hit. So it looks like he's got staying power. But then when Cats in the Cradle goes #1, that was the game changer. And so we were just, as a family, seeing that go up the charts and seeing him have a #1 hit, and he couldn't believe it. It changed everything, because all of a sudden he had, a lot more fame, a lot more financial security. And then the interesting thing is, I think that song motivated him to say, look, I've had incredible success with music, been very fortunate, but now I want to do something more. And I think that song gave him the ability to pursue something that was very important to him, which was to fight hunger and poverty. So he started Why Hunger in 1975, and he spent a lot of time focusing on supporting that organization, and he helped create a presidential commission under President Carter in 77. 78, and then he started a food bank on Long Island in 1980 called Long Island Cares. So it opened so many doors for him, and it created so many additional dimensions to his life. So that song meant everything to our family and everything to him.
And his charity work and his music seem to have inspired other great things, right, from other great artists. Was it the We Are the World, or was that inspired?
I think, it's always important for me to remember and to remind others that, my father was supported by a lot of great people. He had, my mother, of course, he had Ken Cragen as his manager. And Ken Cragen also managed many other greats, from Lionel Richie to Kenny Rogers. And so Ken Cragen supported my father doing all of this humanitarian work and all this charity work and all these benefit concerts. He did 100 benefit concerts a year. And so without Ken's support, I don't think a lot of that would have happened. And Ken Cragen was the one, fast forward to 85, and the famine in Africa. And after the English musicians put together their hit, They Don't Know It's Christmas. And then that led to We Are the World, and We Are the World led to Live Aid. And Ken Cragen said, and Harry Belafonte said at the American Music Awards, that my father helped inspire that, which, is incredible. And Ken Cragen also went on to do Hands Across America. And Kenny Rogers, again, performed with my father at our high school doing a benefit concert. He was instrumental in helping to do a benefit concert that helped to create the Harry Chapin Foundation. So all these people who my father had relationships with are critically important to his legacy.
Creating music is not an easy thing to do. It's a task, and writing lyrics and singing and performing, it's more than a full-time job. A year later, after the 1974's Cats in the Cradle hit, your father goes out and he starts all these, this nonprofits, and he's going to bat for all these great causes. What within your father allowed him to be able to not only spend full time with the music, but to have such a humanitarian way of thinking?
He came from a very artistic family. So he had a grandfather who was a well-known literary critic, Kenneth Burke. He had another grandfather who was a well-known painter, James Chapin. And he had a lot of teachers and other people who were very socially active. So he grew up in that community where you really understood what the big social issues were, and you tried to find some way that you could have an impact, that you could get involved and help. And so I think that was very important to him. But one of his heroes was Pete Seeger. And he did a lot of concerts with Pete Seeger. They had a good friendship, spent a lot of time together. And he always thought that Pete was an amazing person because he supported any and every charity where he could, and inspired a lot of other people to support what he was doing, and to, find other causes that they could support so that they could have a difference, make a difference.
So you co-produced this great documentary. What would you like to see people get from this documentary and feel from this documentary?
If it just brings back great memories of all the musicians and all the concerts and all of the impact that music has had in their childhood and their adulthood. And I find that the film also does a great job of talking about how music connects generations. So, Cats in the Cradle, it was passed down to children, and now their children are passing it down to grandchildren. So it's got, that incredible multi-generational impact, and, still get letters and still see people post about how much of an impact that song had on them and their relationship, their role as a parent. But I also love in the film the impact, since, we're talking about the younger generation. There are a lot of reaction videos in the film. So these are folks who have never heard the song, and they're told by one of their listeners, you should listen to the song, and you see them listening to the song for the first time and watching them react. And these are folks in their 20s who have no idea. They say, this next song by Harry Chapin, they don't even know who he is.
That was funny in the documentary,
yeah.
how many people called him Chapin. Yeah.
But, a lot of them, when they hear the song, some of them say, I may have heard this before. And somehow, it makes that connection, which is great. And then another thing that I love about the film, it talks about the international impact of the song. So it wasn't just a big hit in the US, it was a big hit in the UK and Canada, Australia, and many other countries in Europe, and in other parts of the world. So you have these people from all over the world talking about how they grew up with the song and how much they love the song. And, another thing that we do in the song is we pay tribute to all the other legends who have performed the song, everyone from Johnny Cash to Judy Collins to Mandy Patinkin, and Ugly Kid Joe. They had a #3 hit with the song in the 90s. And great band. And Whitlaw Crane, the lead singer, he talks about how much of an impact that song had on him growing up. So just so many different people talking about how that song had an impression on them. And it's just great to hear and be able to share that.
Jason, do you have a favorite lyrics from the song? Anything in particular that stands out for you?
Well, I think that, I'm often reminded of all the things I did with him growing up. So, it gives me a lot of positive memories when I hear the song. And I often think about, see you later, Dad, can I have the car keys? It's the whole thing about when you're a teenager, that's when you start thinking about your relationship with your parents, and you start realizing at some point, hey, they have a lot of good qualities. They're not just the ones who are, telling me I have to do this, I have to do that. So I just, I love the full circle, the cycle that the song goes through, the different stages of life. And, I always think about that last verse, how they're trying to reset their relationship. Dad has time, but the son doesn't. So it comes full circle. But it's always been a reminder for me how much I had to really understand how important it is for me to be a good father. And I've got 3 kids that I hope I've done a pretty good job.
And in the documentary, Harry talks about Taxi, his other great hit, and he says 60% of it is true. Can you tell us what 60% is true and what's not?
Yeah, he actually was struggling. He was between film jobs when he was writing that song, and he was also trying to, spend more time performing and trying to get a record deal. So when, he had some bills to pay, he actually applied for a hack license. He was planning to be a taxi driver. And, 3 days before, he got some more film jobs. So that was, semi-biographical. And then he also did have an old girlfriend. Her name was Claire. And I think a lot of that was written about their relationship when they were dating. And then, he did go to the Air Force Academy. Believe it or not, he went to the Air Force Academy, but he dropped out. So a lot of those pieces of that song are based on his life experiences.
So she was gonna be an actress, and I was gonna learn to fly. That's all true, huh?
That's true.
Okay, that's an amazing thing. And what about Taxi in terms of anything in particular to that song that really stands out? Any lines?
Well, I got to give credit because when he was playing in Greenwich Village trying to get a record deal, he was signed by Jack Holtzman. And crazy enough, Judy Collins talks about this in one of her podcasts when she interviewed Clive Davis. My father was in a bidding war with Jack Holtzman, the founder of Elektra Records, and Clive Davis. And Jack won, and Jack signed my father to a 10-album contract, which was one of the biggest at the time, which, my father was blown away by. But, that song wouldn't have become a hit, I don't think, without a DJ in Boston. And, it's a very controversial song. It was 6 minutes long. And it talked about getting stoned. So, another surprise hit.
And so, what would you like people to remember most about your father?
I think I would like them to remember him as a gifted singer, songwriter, performer who played his heart out, loved his fans, and would go out in the lobby afterward, spend time with them, and raise money for Why Hunger. But also, he was a great father, great family man. And I think he was a great humanitarian. He started several charities. He dedicated half of his earnings and half of his concerts to benefit other organizations, not just his charities. And he was truly committed to making the most of his life and trying to inspire other people to do something that would help others.
And what parts of the film that you produced are your favorites? Anything in particular that stands out? I know they're all your baby, everything in the film, but is there one thing
Yeah.
that kind of like, wow, this, we really nailed it?
Well, again, the reaction videos, again, having a lot of fans talk about my father and what he meant to them, priceless. And I just love some of the things that Billy Joel said about their friendship and how they supported each other and the whole songwriting process. Love what Judy Collins said, Pat Benatar, and she performed Shooting Star. She's done that live in concert. And Mandy talking about, how he was inspired by my father and all the humanitarian work he did. And Dee Snider saying, he hated acoustic guitar and hated, all these, songs, and he fell in love with Cats and Cradle. So I can't really pick a favorite, but if you put it all together, I think it's just a collection of great stories and great people telling those stories.
And how do people get to see this documentary, and what's the goal with it moving forward?
It's available on DVD because, it tends to cater to an older audience. So you get that on Amazon and, Walmart, a couple other places. But it's also available on Apple TV, Amazon, and it's available now on a couple others like Fandango and Vimeo. And it's going to be on, I think it's on Tubi, Roku, Google, Fandango. So a lot of the streaming services. And we didn't do a theater release. We did a couple premieres and fundraisers, but and hopefully, we'll continue to add more distributors, different partners. We'd love to get it on the airlines and cruise ships, educational, international, because a lot of fans can't see it in overseas or in other countries. And I really want to make sure they have that opportunity. So we're always looking for ways to increase it. But I think viewers should know, if they love the film, let others know about it, because the more people see it, the more we have a chance of making some money that we plan to share with the charities.
Well, when a song is, done 51 years ago, there's kind of two kinds of reactions. One is, oh my God, I grew up with that song. And two is, I never heard of the song, because maybe you're too young. Gen Z still hasn't heard of that song. So what are your thoughts about, this Gen Z crowd that's probably still becoming familiar with all of his music?
I think that's great, because vinyl has made a comeback. I mean, I didn't see that coming. Vinyl now outsells CDs, and people are really passionate about their collections, and they can be in their 20s. I also love the fact that, you can see all the music you want on YouTube and other channels, and Spotify and all the streaming services are opening up, all these different musicians and songs to the younger generation, and they're into it. And I've been to concerts like Billy Joel, and you can have 4 generations of people at that concert. So I think the 70s music is holding up pretty well. I think a lot of parents loved it, passed it down to their kids. I think it's great that the Gen Zs and now the Alpha generation, they're curious, and I think they're liking what they hear with the 70s and 80s and 90s music.
Well, to close out our show, is there anything else you'd like to add about the documentary, about Harry Chapin in general, or even about yourself and your future works?
Well, I hope they get to see the film. I hope they love the film, tell other people about the film. And I just love documentaries, so I'm always looking for the next one. And I loved hearing you sing Cats in the Cradle, so thank you very much. And I love, the background, you being from Queens, and I was born in Brooklyn, so I just love all the connections with people. It's not 6 degrees of separation. We're all 2 degrees separated. So I really enjoyed talking to you about the film, and I'm always, eager to hear what people think about the film. So, we've got some fan pages on Facebook and Instagram. Anybody who sees it, love to read some comments and hear some stories.
Well, Jason Chapin, thank you so much for being on our show today and sharing the story of your iconic and legendary father, Harry Chapin.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.